All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and a warm welcome to everybody. This is Toby Conrad, VP of Sales at Smartlogic. We're joined on this webinar today by our customer and our partner, KPMG. KPMG recognized a critical need in the market for their banking customers to comply with the growing burden of regulation without letting costs spiral out of control and without a decline in the quality of service those banks provide for their customers. In solving this challenge for its clients, KPMG built a service which has been made possible by natural language processing and semantics. After evaluating the technologies on the market, KPMG chose Smartlogic as its partner. So in this webinar today, KPMG will be describing the challenges faced by financial organizations and describing an approach that applies not only to financial services but to many other industries as well. Today we'll also see a live demonstration of the platform that they've built. If you've got any questions during the webinar, within the GoToWebinar panel that you have on your screen, you'll see a questions box, and if you open that up, you can post questions, and we'll do our best at the end of the webinar to answer all of those questions. So one of the key technologies that makes the KPMG solution possible is fact extraction. So fact extraction analyzes documents of any type and extracts all the important facts and links those facts together according to how they're described in the actual content. So the example that you see on the slide now shows an adverse event report which could be sent to a pharmaceutical company. And that document could be analyzed using fact extraction to determine who the patient is, but also to extract their demographics, their medical history, the medications that were prescribed, the adverse event that actually happened. And so all of that information is extracted as structured data, which means it can then be used for analysis and for workflow. So that's what we mean by fact extraction. So this has many different valuable applications in different industries. So for example, in healthcare, it can be used to analyze outcomes according to what interventions were made, for a particular patient, and therefore to determine what are the best approaches for any given condition. In the pharmaceutical industry, product labels can be analyzed to complete IDMP regulatory submissions in an automated fashion. In oil and gas, companies are using this to analyze their contracts to determine exactly what drilling rights they have and what royalties need to be paid. High-tech firms are using this to resolve technical issues more quickly by looking at past history of tickets and reports where customers have faced similar issues and therefore improving customer service. Insurers are using it to determine how risk concentrates across multiple different policies, and banks are using this to comply with the growing burden of new regulations. So that point leaves me perfectly on to introduce Michael's talk. Michael Henry from KPMG leads the client onboarding services for KPMG. He's got a career spanning 25 years, transforming the way banks and insurers and exchanges do business. He's had the opportunity to live and work on 3 different continents, and very kindly has joined us today to share his experience with you. So with that, Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Toby. My name is Michael Henry, and it's a pleasure to be here. I just want to point out that some of the material we're going to be going through, it will be fairly technical in the sense that it will be a lot of compliance information. And if you have any questions about what we're doing or how we're using the technology, especially the Semaphore platform, please use the chat box, and we'll do our best to answer as we go, and of course we can always answer questions at the end. What I will do, I'll give a brief overview of what we're doing with the platform we've built and the problem we're trying to solve, and then we'll show you, my friend Justin, who's on the phone as well, Justin Giulliano, will do a demo of the platform so you can see the power of Semaphore and how we use it to extract facts from these unstructured documents. Now, let me just kick off by saying that if you are at all related to the financial services industry, either as a participant, so if you work for a bank or an insurance company or a broker-dealer, or if you're a customer. I know myself, I just obtained a mortgage recently, earlier this year. You understand the enormous burden of complying with the number of regulations that these institutions are subject to. So, for example, one of our clients, they have a center in Hyderabad that employs 3,500 people whose job it is to read documents to identify customers correctly, assign them a risk level, and perform all these regulations that are associated with Know Your Customer. There's another very complicated function, which is to try to spot anti-money laundering, which all banks are required to do, monitor and report that. And that's also a very complex function, and just in product by product, you'll find regulations have really increased on our clients. And quite frankly, the banks, insurance companies have trouble keeping up with them. And not only does that create an enormous operational burden, it also increases the cost of doing business. And importantly, we have a client where we're doing work today where the driver is to improve customer service. If, like me, you have tried to obtain a mortgage in the United States in the last 4 or 5 years, you understand what a painful process that is, even for banks with whom you are already doing business. There's just a big part of the pain of this is simply receiving documents and having to extract facts from those documents and then perform some sort of validation on that. So Toby, if you want to move on. So here's a typical example. There is the bank has a bunch of Know Your Customer processing it has to do for clients that are incoming. They fall behind. Another great example is there's a bank merger or acquisition, or simply an acquisition of a portfolio, and it creates, in any of these cases, it creates a backlog of Know Your Customer reviews. And what will typically happen is the regulators will say, well, by a certain date, you must complete all these KYC reviews. And by far, the most popular approach to solving this problem is to employ hundreds of people to start looking at documents, and if the bank is sophisticated, it will have put in some workflow technology to help and some document management capability to help. But a lot of the work that these hundreds of people are doing is simply pulling a document up and reading and trying to extract information. What is the social security number in the United States for this individual? What is the business address of the company we're talking about? What's the taxpayer identification number? If this is a trust, who are the beneficial shareholders and how much do they own? And sometimes you can get lucky, and some of these, like for example, some banks have implemented e-forms on the front end to try to gather these data. But by far, most of the information that's gathered this way is coming in some form of a document. And I think of my personal experience obtaining a mortgage earlier this year. The documents that I provided to the bank had some human being somewhere had to open up the document I sent, and most of the time it was a PDF. And the bank's lucky I was sending them PDF. Some customers still send paper, and open it up and then read it and type it into some other, in that case, a loan origination system. So, of course, there are a lot of problems with this approach. This center that I mentioned with this client that has 3,500 people in Hyderabad, the person who runs that center told me they have an attrition rate of 10% per month. Because as you can imagine, the way I've described the work, this is hardly the enriching career-building experience that most people like to do. I want to point out as well that most of the time, This work is completely, I won't say useless because you have to do it to comply, but it results in no action. Most of the time, you're simply affirming that, yes, I have the right documents, yes, the data are valid, yes, this is, I have everything I need to move forward. It's simply the case that someone has to spend a few hours collecting that information to check a box. So it's a very, it's completely unrewarding activity. And can you imagine if you're probably familiar with some of the high-profile cases where a bank gets this wrong? If a bank's customer is found to be breaking a law, either laundering money or dealing with a sanctioned country or involved in some sort of illegal activity, the regulators will come to the bank and say, explain to me how you onboarded this customer, tell me the checks you ran, and explain to me how this person slipped through. And if the bank can answer those questions responsibly, then the bank is actually not liable for what the customer does. The customer can just be a bad actor. What the bank is liable for is the fact that they had a reasonable set of policies that the regulators would agree, yes, that's the right set of checks, and they can show that they actually performed those checks and the results of those checks. And so if you can imagine, if you're doing this, let's say, I don't want to be too uncharitable to offshore, because offshore has been a wonderful way to control costs through labor arbitrage. But if you can imagine, here's a bank, let's say headquartered in London, that has established global minimum standards for Know Your Customer, has passed those on to some operational center in a low-cost location. The manager of that center will receive those policies and instruct the couple of hundred people he has working for him to make sure to check these on all of our client files if it's of this type. And 10% of those people just came on board this month. And they're probably $8 to $12 an hour file clerks. So you can imagine the nervousness of a compliance executive or a risk management executive in a bank, knowing that they could be exposed to human processing in this area. There are many solutions. There's some wonderful workflow products that help streamline the process and manage the work and put the work into queues and allow you to prioritize. It's wonderful. And of course, all of the large banks are very, very heavy investors in workflow. The bank that I'm describing, I'm going to keep using them as an example, they have spent close to $1 billion implementing one workflow package across their enterprise, very large bank, of course, and that workflow helps them manage 3,500 people in Hyderabad with an attrition rate of 10% a month. And so what tends to happen is, there are mistakes that are being made. When you review things, you find other problems, work continues to come in, and there's a continuous recycle or regeneration of this backlog. And, to be fair, there's a whole ecosystem of providers that are very happy to provide you with contract labor to help do this. People on the high end like we do, and then of course people on the low end who will help you set up and run these offshore centers. But our point of view in KPMG is that this is the wrong way to solve the problem. If you look at why there are so many people performing this function, there are some key tasks that are performed repeatedly, and key among them is this idea that a person has to read a document that comes in an unstructured format, and and simply has to either read it and do something with that information, or read it and transcribe it into some system. And that is a huge part of the effort, and that is one of the key things that we have attacked in our platform. And it's where we leveraged Semaphore. We're very happy to be working with Semaphore, in addition to, of course, using their product as we do across all our clients. We partner with Semaphore. They help us solve some of our more challenging problems, and I will show you how we attack this in subsequent slides. So let's move on, Toby. Again, happy to take any questions so far. So this is a typical way a client on the upper left interacts with a bank. The bank has multiple silos. the silos tend to contain the products that the customer would use. So if I am, in my case, I'm applying for a mortgage, well, that's probably coming through the retail bank. If I am an enterprise and I'm looking for financing or some sort of debt, then I'll probably go to the investment bank. And if I am a high net worth individual, then I may be working with the wealth management group or, of course, a private bank in some organizations. And there are a whole bunch of business services in the commercial bank. And the problem is, as the client, even if I am already onboarded in one part of the business, when I cross silos, so let's say I am a commercial bank customer and I have a number of products, cash management, lockbox, whatever, and I'm also a high net worth individual and I go to set up an account in the wealth management group, well, that group will be very happy to send me over a request for a bunch of documents that I have already provided as an owner of my enterprise, whether or not the bank doesn't know that it has it in the other part of the bank. It's quite common, and so therefore I am very irritated because I have to now go back and forth. I think a great example of this is when I'll tell you my own personal mortgage example. I've been a client of one of the large banks here in the U.S. Since university days, and when I applied for the mortgage, I applied with them. Thinking to myself foolishly that this process would be easier, and the first thing they asked me for was 3 months of bank statements, which I thought was pretty amusing since I'm a customer of that bank. And then of course on the right side of the diagram is what we've talked about. It's a cubicle farm, either outsourced or probably captive offshore, with hundreds of people or thousands of people that are processing all these documents. And the way this should work, our vision of this on the next slide, is really if we can solve the problem of ingesting data one time and doing it in a very automated way, we can have a lot fewer people handling exceptions while the machine does all of the mundane work. And I want to point out that especially in the cases where all we're doing is extracting data, applying some rules and validation to it, and the outcome is there are no problems, there is no reason in my mind why a human being should be involved in that process. If it can be automated, it should. Now, there could be a QC oversight where you want to check and make sure the machine is doing things right, and we have clients that love to sample that stuff. But there's no reason to involve humans in doing things where Semaphore can extract the data easily and we can apply the policies and run it through. And when we get to some of the statistics of the productivity improvements we get, what I'll show you is we talk about a percentage reduction in manual effort. What that means is that it's really a percentage of things that go straight through. The things where you actually, I think, should involve a human being remain performed by human beings, and the productivity declines only slightly, mostly in the preparation of the case. So for example, if I'm going through onboarding a customer and I notice that he's a politically exposed person, that's probably something you want a human being to look at. And so what we do, we would kick that out and say, okay, we found what's called a PEP check. We found a PEP check, a positive on a PEP, and therefore somebody should look at the case and a human being should get involved. But if everything is fine and we have all the documents we need, the documents are all valid, we're able to extract all the information from the documents, there's really no reason for humans to get involved. And of course, once we automate this, we can keep it in a repository and make it available for people throughout the enterprise. And there's some other ancillary benefits to that I'll get to in a second. If we move on, Toby. All right, so the way we've constructed our solution, there are several different parts. On the bottom left is what we call our content enrichment framework, and this is where Semaphore is our product here. So when we ingest documents from clients, these KYC documents that I'm talking about, this is where we extract the facts from the documents and convert unstructured data into structured data. On our upper left, we have a policy engine. That's where we encode our rules. So we have, as KPMG, we're quite well known in the KYC, AML, compliance, regulatory reporting space. So we have a set of policies that we've encoded for different use cases. The first ones we did were tax classification, so FATCA and now CRS. We do KYC and AML, and now we're doing mortgage processing as well, which I'll talk about later. In the center, we pull in the policies and the data from the content enrichment framework into what we call our execution engine. This is our big data platform that runs on Smartlogic. This is what allows us to do the comparisons, to keep the audit trail. This is where kind of the rubber hits the road once we have the data and the policies. And then on the bottom right, we have what we call our orchestration engine. This is our workflow product that we use in our operation. And really what it does is, let's say Semaphore kicks out an exception that says, hey boss, I am, for those, I'm sure all of you on the phone know Semaphore, it will also give you a confidence interval of how confident the system is at extracting the right value. If that's below a certain level, it would kick out an exception. One of our people would look at it. It's also the workflow tool that we use to manage any kind of policy exceptions and escalations. On the upper right, we have a web crawling interface that when we're trying to obtain KYC documentation, if it's available from a government website or database or a subscription data service, we can get it from there. Sometimes you can get actual data, sometimes you get an unstructured form, which then would have to be passed back into Semaphore. But where possible, if we can avoid bothering the client for documentation because we can get it publicly, why shouldn't we? And for the case of listed companies in UK, Western Europe, United States, you actually can get a lot of data from public sources. So this is the architecture of the platform. Let me show you a little bit about how we are able to drive value from this. We can move on, Toby. The application of Semaphore here. So the key thing that we do with Semaphore, and I think where we work really closely with Toby and his team, look, we know KYC, we know anti-money laundering, we know tax classification, we know regulatory reporting, we know compliance, we know the mortgage space, we know the lending space. And so what we've done is we have involved our experts to create the ontologies so that for the document types that we typically use for these functions, we are very, very good at extracting that information, and we're continually enhancing the models. We monitor extraction rates and always doing continuous improvement. We actually apply some kind of post-validation to help the extraction rate, and so we have we've modeled pretty much the whole space of let's say Hong Kong, Western Europe, UK, US in terms of KYC documentation. The key here is that, of course, for those of you who know Semaphore, is that once you kind of expose your subject matter experts to building these ontologies, it's very business-driven. There's less need to involve a lot of IT work in putting this together, and that's also very important for us. And of course, one of the things we value a lot is the confidence interval that's driven off of the tool that we use to kick out exceptions, and also as part of our ongoing management information process. So moving on. All right, so let's talk about KYC. This is a spreadsheet in the middle and on the right side here where we actually did this for one of our clients. Look, we use the term digital labor to describe this type of automation. So here in the column that says actual time, this is we basically did a time and motion study of the things that the client was doing to pre-process the identification and know your customer processing for a medium risk commercial banking client. And on the average, they were spending about 13 hours, a little over 13 hours to produce that case. That's a very common metric. We see anything from 10 to 30 hours of processing because each bank will do things a little bit differently. Each bank has a different level of sophistication, and of course different banks perform differently. But at this bank, the average was 13 hours. And out of the box, which means using just the models that we configured before, not just for this client, our generic model set, we were able to get an automation rate of about 80% or 77% overall. So what that means is that a case that would take 13 hours would take almost 3.5 hours. Now, of course, that's a direct savings, but and once again, as I mentioned in the beginning, the real value here is not in the average, but it's in the fact that the things which should be straight through, in other words, humans were involved doing very mundane things that ended up adding no value except checking a box, tended to be performed by the machine quite well. And the 3-hour average is probably 13 hours on a smaller set of cases, or some smaller set. Of course, we got some productivity. So, and this is very compelling. And when Justin shows you the demo, we'll show you. You'll see right away how this works. I just want to point out that the real benefit of this, of course, everyone loves the productivity improvement. And as you can imagine, once you automate this, the number of people you need to perform this process will now grow logarithmically with volume instead of linearly. So you can do double the volume with 10% more people. That's an enormous cost avoidance benefit. But in addition, and this is usually something that comes in later in the process as we start getting involved with the actual compliance people instead of the operations people. Look, the example I gave you before, your head of FinCrime in London has spent a lot of money and time defining your AML policy. And it typically it's in a manual, and it's being sent out to the operations center, and you hope to God that it gets implemented correctly. And you probably have a little way to check if it is, except for an AML officer opening a case himself. But here, since it's being done by a machine, every rule is being applied all the time. There is there's no discretion. There's no, I've got my quota to fill for the day. I've got my kids to pick up from school. I'm sick today. The last 20 cases I did was just check the box. So I'll bet these next 5 are also just check the box. The human beings in general, as wonderful natural intelligence as we are poorly suited for this type of work. But the machine is very good. So when we get involved in this, I always warn my customers, the clients we have, be careful, because we're probably going to kick out more exceptions because the machine checks more carefully. Let's go on to the next slide. We'll talk about tax. I'm sure some of you may be familiar with FATCA requirements. We've been in the FATCA business for a couple of years. Look, let's say, for those of you who don't know, FATCA is the requirement that a bank has to, a foreign bank has to ask its client, when I say foreign, I mean non-U.S., excuse me, a non-U.S. bank, if they want to do business in the U.S. banking system, has to comply with an IRS regulation which says I have to check if my customer is actually subject to U.S. taxes, and it's a very complicated set of regulations. And if for example, if I have a bank account in France and they ask me to fill out a form, I filled out what's called a W-9, which says I am an American citizen. It's a one-page form. Fine, the bank will now start reporting me. Let's say somebody like Toby, he lives in the UK. He would love to declare himself as not a U.S. resident in terms of tax purposes, so the bank doesn't have to withhold on him. Further, he's in the UK, which has a treaty with the U.S., which means he doesn't even need to report. So he would fill out a W-8 Ben-E, one of my favorite forms. It's about 8 pages. It's got all sorts of cross-field validation. It's like a declaration of taxes. You check the box here, which means you have to fill in this section. If you check this box, that means you can't check that one. Signature has to be there. I have to check this box that I've disclosed. Now, you can do it with an e-form, and many banks have issued e-forms, and that's great, because that saves you the difficulty of validating the form. But many clients hand fill these forms, and taking in, validating that form, and ingesting those data, that takes a certain amount of time by itself. But in the case of a W-8 Ben-E, the bank not only has to take that declaration, it also has to perform due diligence on Toby. Everything the bank knows about Toby from its KYC process, I have to look through it and look for what's called contrary evidence, or it's also called U.S. indicia. Do I have evidence that actually, Toby is claiming to be exempt, but he actually has a U.S. phone number, or one of his addresses is a U.S. address? The bank is responsible for investigating and what's called curing any evidence they discover, and that involves, guess what, going through KYC documents and reading them. So in the case of FATCA here, a good analyst processing a W-8 Ben-E probably spends an hour to an hour and a half doing the validation, the input, the due diligence, and using the automated platform, because we are using Semaphore to extract the data, and we're doing the policy checks automatically. We can do 10 to 12. In this case, you can see circled on the slide, they're 4.5-minute average. Now, once again, that means that most of the things are going straight through, because we're doing the checks and nothing's happening, and then the things are being kicked out is, okay, we had trouble reading the form, or there is actually something where there's a cure that has to be made, and that's what you want your human beings to spend time doing. Moving on to the next example, Toby, we'll talk about regulatory reporting. You know, we talk about CCAR or the Basel III regulations. There's a requirement that in addition to producing the regulatory report, which shows the stress test on your balance sheet, the bank has to maintain traceability of the values in those reports back to their sources, which means back to the documents. And in order to comply with this, the bank we were working with, they had 300 people working on their commercial real estate portfolio, reading documents and typing these things into Excel. And what we were able to show, and what I like about this example, is not only can we do the automated extraction, I think that part would have been okay, but the real value here is because we could extract the data in context from these forms, we were able to assemble data completely free of metadata. So I'm talking about data like abc.pdf, and determine, yes, this is the type of document this is. And based on some information we find in the document, it's probably part of, let's say, a loan modification, and it's probably part of the modification that happened around this date. And we're able to not only extract the data, but build this chart you see on the right side, which in the portfolio, it belongs to this client, it belongs to this loan, it belongs to this event in that loan's life cycle, it belongs to this document in that event, and here, and if you want to, we could show you the document, and here's where the data came from. So clear productivity improvement, wonderful demonstration of the power of Semaphore and the smarts of the ontology. Moving on. Just want to give one more example. Mortgage. Now that we just entered the mortgage market this year, the post-closing review of mortgage documents in the U.S. is an enormously burdened by compliance checks. There are a number of data that must be consistent across the various forms that are being provided to the client that has to match to your systems. There's a lot of formula-driven validation. And again, the penalties for getting this wrong are quite high. You may have to, you may have an interest rate you didn't expect to give. You may have a fine. You may have penalties you have to pay the client, and there are also penalties for violating certain compliance rules. Once again, the main activity here is a client a couple of hours south of me by plane. They have 1,200 people doing post-closing mortgage review, and most of that work is reading 4 documents, comparing it to 2 different systems, and making sure that for 650 different data that they are the same across documents. So can you imagine the human joy of performing that task, especially if 99% of the time the data do match and there's nothing to do. So by the same principles, we will extract the facts from the unstructured documents and the structured documents with Semaphore. We'll apply the policies, push straight through everything we need to, and the remaining humans can then perform whatever needs to happen on an exception basis. So typically that would mean patching a system or annotating a document. It could involve going back to the client, but those are things you want people to do. You don't want the people doing the rote checking. All right, so moving on. Good time, if there are any questions, happy to take. Otherwise, I will, and of course, happy to take questions at the end. Otherwise, I will hand you over to my good friend, Justin Giulliano, who will show you a demo of how we use Semaphore to extract information from unstructured documents. Justin?
Thank you, Michael. Hello, everyone. My name is Justin Giulliano. I work with Michael Henry on our digital label platform, and I'll be showing you the demo today of our KYC use case. Everybody should see my screen right now, and what you're seeing here is an operational dashboard. This just shows different work items and different queues. These are active links. I can click on one. It'll bring me right to that specific work queue. I'm going to start the demo by showing document ingestion and extraction using Smartlogic Semaphore, and then move on to a KYC case. You can actually see our policy engine in work and how we run policy or rules on the data we extract off of these documents. To start the demo, I'm going to click on our toolbar here on the right and go to document ingestion. Now, typically at clients, we would batch upload documents or hook into document repositories to ingest documents, but for the purposes of this demo, I'll show you a manual ingestion. So I'll click on the Add Files button here, and I'll be ingesting this client representation letter. It's an unstructured document, KYC document here. I'm going to click Open and upload this document into the system. Again, manual way we're ingesting, so I'm just going to put the entity classification, so certain rules run on this document. I'm going to click Submit here at the bottom toolbar to ingest the document now. You can see here that the document's been successfully ingested. Now I'm going to go back to the toolbar here on the right, click on Result of Ingestion underneath our document management queue. Now in the Result of Ingestion queue, you can see really the workflow of the system here for documents, document management. There's translation queues, processed and unprocessed documents, pending manager review or SME review if they need to be reviewed. Click on our unprocessed document and scroll to the document we just ingested. Now, this is a client representation letter for Key Management, which is a company, and what it's going to open up to here on the left-hand side is a e-form that's been generated for that client representation letter, and on the right-hand side, this is the extraction results out of Semaphore. It's showing the field, the value, as well as giving it a confidence score of how confident the system is that it extracted that data correctly. Now, the system doesn't know what type of document it is when we ingest these. They just go in as xyz.pdf. So the system's actually reading the document type off of the document itself using Smartlogic. And here you can see the document type was verified as client representation letter, and it also gives a confidence score here on the right-hand side of how confident it is. I can also click on the source file here, source button, and this will bring up the actual source file. There's that unstructured client representation letter on the right-hand side. On the left here, I can scroll down to show you any values that have been extracted and populated here on the e-form. Here you can see average monthly transaction size was extracted. Scroll down a little bit further here. The director information. Here's some address information for this entity that's been extracted. You can see here on the right-hand side, right in context. Scrolling down some more, registered address, business address, entity name, as well as shareholder information we're extracting off of the document. Here you can see the shareholder name, the country, the date of birth, as well as the percentage of ownership has been extracted perfectly off of this table here on the right in this unstructured document. So that's really the power of the system using OCR technology married with Smartlogic Semaphore on top to really extract data from these unstructured documents, and so we can use it downstream. I'm going to pause there. If there's any questions, feel free to write them in the chat box. At this point, I'm going to switch gears and go to our KYC due diligence processing, so you can show you the rules that are being run on the data that we're extracting off of these documents. I'm going to cancel out of this. I'm going to go back to our toolbar on the right, go to our KYC workview. On the left-hand side in the KYC workview, you can see the workflow of the system as far as the due diligence processing, starting with basic due diligence, ending as an approved case file. I'm going to click on our quality assurance queue. This is one of the last queues before it becomes an approved case file. And I'm going to click on our entity, Key Management, the same entity we used for ingesting that client representation letter earlier. Now what this is going to open up to, you can see various tabs at the top here. These are different steps of the onboarding process, but I want to focus on the Policy Details tab. This is really the power of the policy engine here. Both KYC policies and rules as well as business rules are modeled in our policy engine and run on the data that we're extracting off of documents, as well as third-party data we're bringing in from subscription sources as well as off the internet. And what I can do here is I can scroll down. You can see all the rules that are run on the data, all the checks and confirmations as part of the anti-money laundering KYC compliance rules. I can I can drill in to one of these rules here, say confirmation of registered business address. It'll show me exactly where it's searching for the data, as well as if any data is linked to a document. So for instance, here you can see the registered address was extracted from a valid articles of incorporation that's been pre-ingested. I can click the rule, and it'll bring up that document here on the right-hand side. Let me click it again. And the great thing about that is it's full traceability here. Here's that, again, there's that extraction of the values from the articles of incorporation, as well as I can bring up the source document. So here all on one screen is the rule, where the system's searching for the data to satisfy that rule, and then what document or what source is satisfying that rule or policy. So very powerful screen here. Again, this is our policy engine. This pretty much concludes the demo for KYC. Those are two main components of the KYC demo, the data extraction and then our policy engine. So I'll turn it back over to Michael.
Great. Thank you, Justin. So, at this point, happy to take any questions about the platform, how we use it, our partnership with Smartlogic. Toby's also still on the line. Happy to take any questions you guys want. I hope you can see that the value of the tool not only in performing the processing, but as Justin showed, the ability to generate an audit trail, since every datum, every document, every policy, every application of policy to data is all stored in Smartlogic. I'm sure you can appreciate the fact that audit trailing now is a much less traumatic process for our clients. If you want to know how I was onboarded, you simply have to go and search for me, and you'll get all of my onboarding events, all my documents, all the policies. It's very easy for the bank to show, here are the policies that I ran against Michael Henry. Therefore, if Michael Henry's a bad actor, it wasn't reasonable for me to catch him. So happy to take any questions from the audience. Or Toby, I know you had some questions that people had emailed to you as well, or I could take those as well.
Sure thing, and thank you, Michael. It's great to hear how the technology is being used to solve big problems, and Justin, great to see a demonstration that the technology runs perfectly on a live demo. So yes, we have some questions, so let me take a look. So the first one, probably best taken by you, Michael. How do regulators perceive the use of this technology to address a regulated process?
Well, KPMG has pretty good relationships with regulators in many jurisdictions. I have personally conducted similar presentations to regulators in the U.S., UK, and in Singapore, and in all cases, the regulators are very clear that they would prefer that these functions be automated. That this type of check, if I can show, of course, the foreign governments don't care about FATCA, but let's say I talk to the IRS, they would much rather have a bank they apply 6,000 rules every time in an automated fashion than to count on 100 people in an offshore location reading documents every time. And so the response has been very positive from the regulators, and where we've gone live or going live, of course, our clients are bring us in to demonstrate and talk to the regulators, and we have yet to find a regulator who says, oh no, I would really prefer that you ship that off to a cubicle farm in some far off place.
Great, that makes sense. So we have a technical, couple of technical questions coming in. So are the Semaphore natural language processing tools sensitive to part of speech tagging? So perhaps that's one that I will take. Yes, the short answer is yes. We have a pipeline for processing the content, and once we've extracted all of the text from the document, one of the first things we do is actually apply a part of speech tagging process to it, so that when we're looking for evidence of a particular fact or concept covered in the content itself, we can make sure that it's formed with the right part of speech and use the part of speech to disambiguate different uses of terms. So yes, we have full part of speech available within the system. And then there's a question about can external machine learning natural language processing tools be integrated with Semaphore? I'll answer that. Michael, you may have some interest as well.
Sure.
But we use rules to perform the extraction. Those rules are derived automatically from information that's contained in the ontology, and the two great things about that are, one, that we can tap into the subject matter experts who can just define the information in an ontology, which is easy for them to do. It doesn't require them to have software engineering skills. But secondly, the other beauty of this is that the extraction process is completely transparent and auditable. So, as Michael described, if we're extracting a particular shareholder's ownership from a table, we can point to exactly what we found in the document and exactly how that information was extracted, which, if you need to defend against, a regulator coming in and asking some questions, that transparency is very important. What we are doing as a company with machine learning is to use that to help define the ontology, to support the subject matter experts so they can do that work much more quickly. But also the whole Semaphore processing is completely open and transparent, so we can definitely work with complementary technologies. But we see, in this sort of context, we see great value in helping to build the ontology much more quickly, so that there's complete transparency of everything that happens thereafter.
Yep. And Toby, let me jump in there as well. We, in our digital labor practice, we are very interested in cognitive and machine learning technology, and are making big investments in it. When we look at the application for compliance, just as Toby said, it's very important that a bank be able to demonstrate exactly what rule was applied to determine the disposition of a client. In fact, I'm sure the regulators would disapprove of my putting it this way. It is more important for the bank to be able to describe exactly what rules it applied than it is to show the result. And the cognitive engines, I think, are great for certain applications where you really want a system that can evolve and start making decisions on its own. I recently attended World of Watson last week in Las Vegas. Very impressed with what I saw there. We are doing a lot with Watson. But two things. One is that first, in order to train Watson, you need an enormous body of predetermined cases for it to learn from. And second, from an audit trail perspective, it's difficult for Watson to explain why it came to the conclusions it did, because that's not what it's purposed for. And so I think there's definitely a role for machine learning in some parts of this, but for what we did, we looked at this very intentionally, and the deterministic extraction and application of policies that we use Semaphore for are particularly well suited for this application. But it's clear that the cognitive systems are going to get better, and my expectation, of course, and not to put Toby on the spot, is that when we get to that point, I'm sure Semaphore will evolve to have included that technology.
Right, it's definitely our direction. A couple more questions, Michael. I think these are both for you. The first one is, did you look at any other tools and platforms as an alternative to Semaphore? I think it would be unfair for Smartlogic to answer that question. And the second very interesting question is, are there any plans to standardize the ontologies?
Mm-hmm. Well, very, very good questions, both of them. First, yes, we looked at the available technologies. I'm not going to advertise anybody's name on this broadcast, but yes, we did a thorough review, and in addition to the capabilities of the technology, we were very interested in the type of relationship we could have with the vendor, In addition to, for example, doing a webcast like this, Smartlogic is a great partner just in terms of helping us identify leads. They're very responsive in terms of solving some of our more difficult problems. We still use the professional services arm to crack our harder ontologies, and we're very happy with the partnership. For the second question, remind me again, Toby. It was good, but I can't remember what it is.
It was good. Are there any plans to standardize the ontologies?
You know, the first, since that is really where I think we've invested our intellectual property, I'd like to think that we are differentiated, but I think the compliance industry as a whole should quickly move to standardizing not just ontologies, but the processes in general. Compared to tax regulations, which are very clear and very detailed, issued by tax authorities in different countries, in every jurisdiction, KYC AML policies themselves are really guidelines and left to the discretion of the bank to implement. So that itself causes a lot of customization and spiking of different versions of the policies for different banks. Would love it if that were more consolidated, and the whole ontology and data dictionary for KYC is a wonderful case tool someday for an industry utility to provide, and it would be great if, let's say, when we go to Indonesia, and there is a particular model for, let's say, an articles of incorporation for an Indonesian country. Wouldn't it be great to be able to get that from a government website or from a data service? I think from an industry point of view, definitely would love it if that happened. Of course, that is one of the things that we think we have a differentiator in. So that's what we've built.
Thank you. Yes, and I know that we work with the EDM Council on the Financial Industry Business Ontology, or FIBO, which is starting to standardize how some of this data is described from a structured data perspective, but it certainly doesn't have the richness in the ontology to actually determine exactly what data elements are needed to support compliance and how those data elements would be found in the variety of different documents that contain them. But certainly perhaps the KPMG ontology could play together nicely with the FIBO ontology to broaden its reach. I have another question, probably again for you, Michael. What languages are supported by this platform?
As you saw when Justin showed the demo, you saw something called a translation queue. Of course, we started out modeling English language documents. Even I was talking to a French bank, and even they were saying that English language is probably 60% of all their KYC documents. Either the document is available in two languages, one of which is always English, or uniquely in English. So of course, English is the first language we tackled. We are implementing now for a large global bank where we have developed ontologies in both English and the complex Chinese character set. We have run pilots for Spanish and French. We haven't found yet the limitation of the language capabilities of Semaphore. Maybe Toby knows where that limit exists. The issue is, of course, when you're building an ontology, you must build it in that language. So when we're building the ontology for Chinese, you need to have Chinese speakers with the relevant domain expertise to build the ontology. There's no built-in machine translation. What this means from a practical perspective, I would love to automate 100% of all my clients' business. Of those 3,500 people in Hyderabad, I'm sure there's 30 or 40 of them processing Urdu, and we may never build ontologies in Urdu because it's a very small part of our clients' portfolio. But boy, if we get English, Chinese, in their case, Bahasa, simple and complex Chinese, maybe a couple of European languages, you have really broken the back of the problem, and you can always manually process the tail. But there's I'm unaware of a technological limit in terms of language. It's simply a question of, do you want to spend the time and have the experts in that language build the ontologies? Toby, you can answer if there's a technological limitation.
Yeah, I mean,
Esperanto.
It's something I haven't heard about for a while. Yeah, I mean, certainly from our perspective, we have very good support for the major languages. As we get to some of the lesser used languages, then we have support for them, but there may be some forms of part of speech or entity extraction which we don't have. So it's always worth looking in detail just to make sure exactly what level of support is provided once you get away from the sort of big Indo-Europeans, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, which we have very good support for. Michael, I don't know if you want to take this question. What are some of the use cases for working with born digital data? So not so much Word documents and things, such as linking forms in different databases together to harmonize. I know you've had some experience around working with banks to harmonize data.
Sure. Toby, of course, that is part of the platform now. So just to give you an example, in the mortgage example, we must harmonize data on several different forms, as well as data that we get from a loan origination system or a CRM system. Of course, the platform eats that stuff up. I mean, for me, getting data where you're confident that the data are correct, it's like mainlining data. I think the issue there is that, of course, what we're talking about here is what we use Semaphore to do, and Semaphore is really good at the document data, but we do all our compliance checks always on a mixture of data coming from documents and data coming from other sources where it comes in as data.
Great, thank you. Well, I think that's all we've got time for now. We're just coming up for the hour. There will be a recording of this webinar posted on our website shortly, as soon as we can get through the process, and we will be emailing out a link to everybody that attended and registered, so they can watch this webinar again or share it with their co-workers. So I'd like to deeply thank everybody that's joined this webinar, and especially those that made it all possible for us today. So thanks again, have a great day, and goodbye.